Welcome back to another week of the third Saturday in October football podcast, the SEC tailgating podcast for the rest of us. I'm Chris Murphy, your resident Alabama fan, and alongside with me, as always, Mr. Tennessee himself, Bradley Minigan. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. I would yell and scream, but there's a sleeping baby upstairs. I'm pumped for SEC football 2020. Let's go.
We have it.
Yes.
At this point in the game, we can say that we're going to have games.
Yeah, I mean, I got Tennessee's schedule right here, ready to go. Just can't wait to dive in. So we don't want to be the only ones in this conversation. Be sure to connect with us on social media at TSIO Pod on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We also record video of our podcast, put those on YouTube. So search Third Saturday in October on YouTube to find us there. Let's start talking about college football.
Man, okay, so this time last week we were questioning, are we even going to have a season? Because at that point, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 had both opted out of playing, which now it looks like there are petitions around the country being signed to try to get them back into the conversation. But the SEC and a few other conferences have been holding strong. And so Monday, we got to look at the actual schedule, which is so exciting. What are your big takeaways from Tennessee and the schedule that we've got going on there?
So I knew it was going to be tough. I think the way this schedule laid out for Tennessee, I think the SEC did some favors to Tennessee. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But I did want to say about the Big Ten and Pac-12 postponing their season. Tennessee center Brandon Kennedy was asked about it. He said, they asked him, what were your first thoughts? He said, my first thoughts were, man, I feel terrible for those athletes. Yeah. Because so many of them want to play. And who knows what's going to happen now, because, I mean, there are petitions going around for the Big Ten and Pac-12 actually playing in the fall. There's a petition for Cade Mays, the offensive lineman who transferred from Georgia to Tennessee, who is denied immediate eligibility. There's a waiver for him to be able to play this season. But that's kind of a whole nother matter. But I'm just excited to have the schedule. I was glued to the SEC Network Monday night when they really released the full schedule. I was caught up in something else and missed on the Paul Feinbaum show the week one announcement. But I did kind of jump on that for late lunch and kind of watched a lot of that. But man, I can't wait for September 26th. Let's play some football.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts on some of the people saying that there was favoritism shown in some of the scheduling of the SEC teams? Have any thoughts there?
Yeah, so it was mainly for Alabama and LSU. And if they're the top two teams in the West, they're towards the top of the entire SEC, especially with the West having been stronger than the East. So part of me says, okay, they're already playing Tennessee. So Georgia would be really the only – Georgia and Florida are the only ones that those two teams could play that would be a challenge. And I don't know if Alabama and LSU are already scheduled to play. I mean, I don't know their schedules. So that leaves Tennessee for LSU, Kentucky, Missouri, Vanderbilt, who am I leaving out? South Carolina. No matter who you pick, you're going to say any of those teams, Alabama and LSU got off easy. So what's the SEC to do? Make them play Texas A&M and Auburn both twice? make them play each other twice. I don't know how. I don't know how they don't get off easy, as people are saying.
Yeah, I agree.
When you're the best and you're playing your own conference, the only teams you can play are lesser teams.
Yeah. If we, as SEC, everybody was added 2 additional teams, then looking at the strength of schedule and then maybe looking at who's left after everybody that you're already going to play, and then making some decisions from there. Usually, Alabama, I think it's probably maybe once, maybe twice a decade that Alabama plays Georgia. I think I read somewhere that it's every 6 years or so on average that they play. And so Georgia being very much on the upswing the last handful of years, it falls into all of this lineup to where they're playing Georgia, they're playing Tennessee. I'm speaking for Alabama. And so maybe throw in Florida there. But if you're already playing Georgia and Tennessee, who are expected to be closer to the top of the SEC East this year, then maybe you're looking at scheduling Alabama with some teams on the lower end of the SEC East. And so that makes sense to me that they tried their best to balance the schedule with giving teams both hard or people that are teams that are projected to play and vie for the East or the West, and then to throw in a few that, or balance it out with some that may not be in that contention this year. So I didn't see a lot to complain about, but I understand that somebody's going to complain regardless of what the schedule looks like.
Yeah. So, I'm happy with Tennessee's schedule. Not that I could do anything to change it if I wasn't, but the way it all worked out is on Monday on Paul Feinbaum, they released week 1. Who does Alabama have week 1?
Week 1, Alabama plays Missouri.
Missouri, that's right.
At Missouri, yeah. So it's an away game for us.
Which is interesting because Nick Saban usually does not play first games of the season away.
Sure.
The closest thing is a neutral site.
Right. In Jerry World or Georgia Dome or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Tennessee's got a game at South Carolina, so both Tennessee and Alabama on the road week 1. But what was interesting is I actually tuned into the SEC Network, the Paul Feinbaum show, shortly after they released week 1, and heard a caller that pretty well. And I want to play that audio from that caller real quick, and then you can give us kind of the backstory of how Richard in Montgomery. So here's Richard.
Sure.
Richard in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Richard.
Hey, Paul, this is Richard in Montgomery. You and I have something in common. I'm an 89-year-old retired Air Force sergeant, and I know you were a friend of Bart Starr's, and his daddy, Ben Starr, was my first sergeant in Montgomery.
Was he really?
And,
wow.
I met him again in Japan. I was stationed in Korea in Japan, and we talked about Bart. When I first came to Ben's office, he had a picture of Bart on his desk kicking a football. So I've been watching you since you and Larry were on at Birmingham, and this is my first time call. But I just wanted to.
Well, let me tell you a story you probably already heard before, Richard. But I've many conversations with Bart. I always would ask him about playing for Vince Lombardi, who is considered one of the greatest coaches and also one of the toughest coaches. And and you've heard this a million times, I'm sure. But he said Coach Lombardi was nothing compared to my dad.
Oh, really? Well, Ben was quite a man. He was a big man, too, and he was real strict on us at Maxwell. I came there as a young recruit, but he was fair. He run a real clean outfit, and he got me promoted my first 2 or 3 stripes. But I lived in the barracks and evidently did some things that pleased him, but I became an Alabama fan because of that in Japan. They teased me in Korea about being from Alabama, and I started watching Alabama football and been a fan ever since, and a fan of yours.
Well, thank you. That means a great deal. And Bart passed away a couple of months ago, was just one of the greatest men I've ever met. And
he sure was, and he sure did make my life and everybody in Montgomery, Alabama, real happy watching him through the years. And we appreciate what you do. I know you got a busy day today with the schedules coming out, but I watch you every day.
well, thank you very much, Richard. It's a real pleasure to hear from you, and all the best.
So, Richard from Montgomery, Chris, I think you know this guy. Why don't you tell us how you know this guy?
Yeah, he is called Richard from Montgomery, but I know him as Tricky Dick or my grandfather, who I call Papa. It was a big surprise. Again, just like you, I had gotten caught up in some things, and I thought that all of the announcement for the schedule was going to be on the SEC Network later on Monday night. And I didn't know that they were going to release the first week on Paul Feinbaum, where I'd have been tuning in. My dad let me know that my grandfather was on the Paul Feinbaum show, and went back and listened to it. And it's so cool to hear him talk about those stories. So yeah, my grandfather's famous now and best friends with Paul Feinbaum, apparently. But when he was originally talking, he said, "You and I have something in common. I'm an 89-year-old retired Air Force vet," or something like that. I thought he was going to tell Paul Feinbaum that he's an old man like my grandfather is. But to hear him recount that story about Bart Starr and Bart Starr's dad, I had actually forgotten about that. Now, my grandfather was born in Michigan and raised in Ohio. And so if it wasn't for that chance meeting with Bart Starr's dad, it's very likely that I'd be a Big Ten fan and probably an Ohio State fan, because he grew up in the Columbus area.
Don't tell me that.
So we'd be doing some other podcasts, but it wouldn't be the third Saturday in October. But him moving, when he mentions Maxwell, that's Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, where my grandfather was stationed and my dad was born. And then I was born in Montgomery as well years later. And so we became a Southern family, but my grandfather is from up north. And so becoming an Alabama fan was a big deal. And my dad was influenced heavily growing up by Bart Starr. They both were years apart, but went to the same high school. And then he went on to Alabama, and then he went on to Green Bay from there. And so football runs in my family, and I hope that I get some of my boys on in a couple of weeks here on the show to talk about our traditions. But I'm an Alabama fan and a Green Bay fan because of that chance encounter. So,
well, he did say that through Ben Starr, his son Bart playing at Alabama, he became an Alabama fan, started watching Alabama football. So that's cool to hear that that's how your family got wrapped up, intertwined with the Crimson Tide football, which is just a really cool story to hear referenced on national media.
Yeah. Well, and so that's now twice this week that my grandfather's been on national media because of Paul Feinbaum show and the third Saturday in October podcast.
Absolutely.
He got a double dose.
Well, that is just so awesome. So wanted to play that just to kind of shout out to Paul, Richard in Montgomery.
What I call what happened on Monday, the call from Paul to the Paul Feinbaum show. Something like that. Kind of works out.
Exactly.
The Paul call to the Paul Feinbaum show.
I love it. It is just, I mean, it shows that it's not just us that love football, but love talking other things other than football. Your grandfather called in to an SEC football radio show and didn't really talk about football. So, I mean, that is just kind of classic third Saturday in October podcast thing to do. And all I can say is you come back naturally.
Absolutely. You got a really good point there. I'll be honest that most of my growing up was surrounded with just talking about random conversations around Alabama football. Again, not having a pro team in Alabama, we didn't have much to cheer for when it came to the NFL.
Right.
Most all of us were Braves fans and either Alabama or Auburn football fans. but we would sit around and talk about that because we didn't have a lot of conversations with, did you see Gary Hollingsworth throw for 300 yards or Bobby Humphrey run for 150 with 2 touchdowns? It was just like, they played good. Did you see what they did? And Coach Gene Stallings, he got them fired up kind of thing. So it was like, it was always talking about the game and not so much the specifics of, a lot of what you hear talking points on big TV shows or even shows like Paul Feinbaum, that it's very stat heavy.
Right.
We didn't care at all about the stats. We care if they won or lost and what the score was and how good they looked, but not necessarily all those specifics. So yeah, you're absolutely right. That's not my strong suit to remember all those, because I grew up just talking about the environment and the feeling and the vibe of college football.
Yeah, well, I loved it, and what a great connection with on a day where such big SEC news was released. So let's get into the schedule.
Yeah, man.
How did you feel? First reaction when you saw Alabama's schedule?
As I talked about this time last year, and as I will say for years to come, because I've been talking about it for years, regardless of how I feel that Alabama will actually end the season, when I look at the schedule and the gauntlet, especially in a year now where it's going to be just SEC teams, no cupcakes, none of those warm-up games, I had a little butterfly that happened because, there's a lot to prove. There's a lot at stake. That was my first thing. When I looked at it, I was like, okay, all right. Well, this is going to be tough. So that was my initial thought. And I had a couple of others, but I just wanted to get your initial reactions to the Tennessee Vol schedule.
Yeah, I saw South Carolina. I thought, okay, I like this a whole lot better than Florida, because Florida was our original opponent for September 26th.
Yep.
Then saw Missouri. Then something that was supposed to change this year but has not, playing Georgia early in the season. Now, I mean, the season's pushed back a little bit, but playing Georgia for our third game of the season, it's like, okay, now it's starting to get really tough, because now we are playing the top of the SEC.
Yeah.
But as I went through it, I said, this could have been a whole lot worse. The hardest stretch I see is Texas A&M and Auburn back to back. And if that's the hardest stretch, I'm happy. Where Tennessee is, where they're trying to go with the schedule being all SEC opponents, I don't know that I could ask for a better schedule.
It's interesting looking at a few things here. We've got Georgia, Auburn, and it looks like Missouri that have something in common, which is they play Tennessee or Alabama, and then the next week they play Tennessee or Alabama. It looks like that Georgia plays Tennessee on the 10th of October. Then the next week they play Alabama. Missouri, it looks like, where am I at here? I'm looking at Missouri, they start the season off with Alabama. Very next week they play Tennessee. And then I think it's Auburn. Yeah, so Auburn on the 21st of November plays Tennessee. Then the very next week they play Alabama. And then the very next week they play somebody else. So for us, for the first time in I don't know how long, the Iron Bowl will not round out the season or finish the season for us playing Auburn. That's an interesting little dynamic there, that Alabama will actually play Arkansas the week after the Auburn game.
Well, and that's what we talked about a week or two ago with the schedule being shifted back. Normally that's that last game of the season this year is a bye week or the SEC championship, because Thanksgiving is always the last game of the season. Mm-hmm. With having to fit 10 games in starting not till September 26th, things got pushed around. And yeah, it's the same thing for us. Vanderbilt, now that it's kind of a rivalry again, because they've beaten us a couple times here recently, is not the last game of the season. We finish out with Florida. And today I just had to go through and I had to say, okay, what do I think is going to happen?
Yeah.
So I'm going to run through wins and losses, what I think's going on.
Yeah.
And I'm not normally a Tennessee, hey, they're just going to be world beaters this year. But I'm close this year. And
There
if
you
you
go.
think I'm making it up, that I'm not really that way, go listen to last season. I doubted.
I think that was more positive on Tennessee than you were last year.
Oh, yeah.
I think you were trying to hold back, trying to be realistic about some things, and I was excited about the movement that the upward trend that Tennessee has had the last several years. But yes, I do agree that you had a few doubts last year, and so I'd love to hear your thoughts now.
So here are my initial thoughts. That
Okay.
Jeremy Pruitt has a couple recruiting classes. He's gotten his guys in. Last year, I wasn't sure how he would do when he gets his guys in. How would he develop them?
Yeah.
I think we saw what he was able to do with some true freshmen last year, and that makes me excited because now those true freshmen have a season of experience, and Pruitt is comfortable with them. I like where this is going. So week 1 at South Carolina. Win. Week 2
Agreed.
at Missouri. I'm sorry. Week 2, Missouri and Knoxville. Win. Week 3 at Georgia. Loss. But I think it's closer this year. Week 4 against Kentucky. Win. Week 5 versus Alabama. Loss. But Alabama better watch out because I mean they played Georgia in there close to it too. I was reading somewhere that Tennessee could get a win against either Georgia or Alabama because they may be either looking forward to their opponent or recovering from that game.
Yeah.
But right now, I think losses both those places. What is this? Week 6 at Arkansas, win.
Yep.
Week 7 versus Texas A&M, win. I have doubts about Jimbo Fisher. Week 8 at Auburn. Jeremy Pruitt knows a thing or two about Auburn. Win again.
Ooh.
Week 9 at Vanderbilt. Win. So we are now at 7-2, playing Florida in Knoxville, December 5th. It's going to be cold. Tennessee wins. I'm thinking 8-2 is very possible. Let's go. Go Big Orange.
All right. I've got a few comments on that, and I think it's an excellent thought of the fact that it's going to be cold in Knoxville for that last game of the season against the Gators.
And it's Florida. How often do they play a late game where it's cold? Maybe Missouri, but they usually don't play Missouri that late. Kentucky. I mean, Kentucky did upset Florida a couple years ago. I think that was in Kentucky. But go ahead with your comments, questions. Hit me with it. No,
and so the idea that Georgia and Florida are who people think will be vying for that top spot in the East this year. I think that Tennessee is one that is closely falling into that third spot for me personally. So I think that depending on what happens, let's see, in November the 7th with the Florida-Georgia game, that whoever comes out the victor there, you guys could be playing Florida and deciding the East with that very last game of the season because of what could be a very close race in the East this year. So that's what I'm excited to see.
And something that I've read a couple people saying is because it's an all SEC schedule, because there are 2 extra games, because it is a tougher gauntlet just playing all conference for that much of the season, there are going to be more upsets.
Sure.
And they said that Tennessee is primed to be one of those upsetters. That's why I think they are going to beat Florida. They're going to beat Auburn, beat Texas A&M. I think they are right there on the edge, and if those teams falter just a little bit because of the grind, Tennessee is in a good position to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
I feel good about the offensive line, even without Cade Mays, because we've got 4 solid guys and some really good backups. I think the line will be okay. We've got great running backs. Our receivers are talented. Some of them are green because they're freshmen, sophomores. But the biggest question I have on offense, quarterback. We got to see how that pans out. Defense, got some good big bodies on defensive line, have a couple of studs at inside linebacker in true sophomores. Our corners are great. Our safeties do have to fill big shoes from Nigel Warrior graduating last year. But Jeremy Pruitt is a chess master when it comes to secondary. With Ansley as the defensive coordinator, I feel good about filling in spots there at safety. So, come on, let's play some football.
Yeah. So, on your prediction for the Tennessee, I think that I am almost lockstep with you. I think especially when you say that Georgia game, it's going to be sneaky. I think that Georgia has one of the toughest 3-week runs in the SEC this year, with playing Auburn, then the very next week playing Tennessee, and then the very next week playing Alabama. And so those 3 very physical games could mean an issue for them. Again, kind of what you were saying of either looking ahead to the Alabama game and maybe dropping their guard some for the Tennessee game. I think that there's some potential there, but coming off of that Auburn game could leave them tired as well. Here's an interesting thing that I see, and again, you know me, being from Alabama, I don't like to throw a lot of love to Auburn, and so I'm going to say this begrudgingly, but it seems like that the latter part of the season, like in a handful of times in the last decade, Auburn has figured something out coming down the home stretch. My fear is Auburn getting close to the end of the season, something turns on in them. I feel like that there's always there's conversations of who's going to wreck the Gus bus every season, and it seems like he's going to be fired until sometime in November when they get some kind of fire lit under them and they live to pull some hijinks out. And so with that, I wonder if Auburn is going to be on fire that latter part of the year when they play Tennessee and then the very next week play Alabama. It could mean danger for both of our squads. And so I think that you have a very strong case of an 8-2 season with you, sir. I think that looks amazing. I can't wait to watch every one of them.
Well, I hope the thing that turns on for Auburn are the breaks. I don't follow Auburn football very closely. What I've read, I know Bo Nix was great last year as a freshman, I believe.
Yeah.
So now he's a sophomore. He's got a year under his belt. It's kind of the same story that I've been saying about Tennessee's true sophomores this year. But most of his offensive line, if not all of it, is gone. Yeah. And I'm hoping that gauntlet before they play Tennessee, before they host Tennessee, that their line is kind of hobbling around a little bit. And that Tennessee can stay healthy and take advantage of that. So I think Tennessee's defensive line definitely has the advantage in experience when it comes to Auburn's offensive line. But that's week 8. You do a lot of growing up in 7 weeks of all SEC football. So we'll
absolutely.
See. But let's move on to Alabama's schedule.
All right.
Chris, how you feeling?
I'm excited. Again, starting off the season at Missouri, again, it's not a typical way to start off a season. This year we were supposed to be starting in about, about 2 weeks away from the actual start of the season, the way that it should have been if none of this would have gone haywire, of us playing USC. So I was really excited about that. But I will take Missouri. If I can have football, I will take Missouri for a first game. I do think that we'll pull away with the win there in the first couple of weeks. I think that Texas A&M week number 2 for us is going to be a tough game. But I'm kind of with you. I don't like saying this out loud because I don't like to be either a Debbie Downer or to talk bad about anybody, but there's just something that I don't understand the hype around Jimbo Fisher and what he brings a lot of potential and a lot of excitement, but I don't see it panning out into actual on the field longevity.
Yeah,
that's just my take.
agreed. The thing that Jeremy Pruitt had was a signature win against Auburn. He won as an underdog at Auburn a couple years ago. I don't know if Jimbo Fisher's had that at A&M.
Right.
So that's kind of a problem when you come into a program that's pretty strong. They haven't. I don't know that they've upset Alabama or LSU since he's been there.
I don't think so.
Some signature win like that is what he needs for people to say, okay, he can coach in the SEC.
Sure, I agree. For whatever reason, I wasn't a big fan of his. Even when he won the national championship with Jameis Winston at Florida State, I almost looked at that as a Jameis Winston led team that won that national championship more than I put a lot of the credit to Jimbo Fisher. But I could be wrong. I'm an amateur sports enthusiast. And so I'm sure that other people see something that I just don't see, but I don't see it. So anyway, I think that Alabama will pull it out against Texas A&M, but I think that will be an early challenge, one that we need, especially 2 weeks later coming up against Georgia. After A&M, Alabama plays Ole Miss against Lane Kiffin, a team or a coach that not only head coach at the Vols, but also an assistant coach under Nick Saban just a few years ago. He's now back in the SEC. I think that we take care of that one, but that may be a game to look out for in the future for some potential excitement in the years to come.
Well, with Lane Kiffin knowing what Saban wants to do on defense and running against Saban defenses for however many 2, 3, 4 years, however long he was there, but also Saban knowing what Kiffin wants to do on offense, those plays that he loves to keep in his back pocket, those plays that as soon as the ball snapped, Lane's throwing his hands up in the air because he knows he's got it. Yeah. Saban's going to figure out a way to keep that from happening. So that is going to be exciting in the West for the future.
I have a sneaking suspicion that with both of those coaches on the field, that maybe that game more than any other game this season, there may be some trick plays thrown into the mix just to try to confuse the other coach and try to keep them on their toes. But interesting idea here. We've got Ole Miss, and then the next game we have Georgia, and then we have Tennessee. All three of those games in a row, Alabama is playing coaches that were formerly assistant coaches underneath Nick Saban. So that's an interesting little stat for that 3-week period there in October. But I think that Alabama takes care of Ole Miss. And then we hit Georgia. And I've read in places where Georgia is probably projected to have the number 1 defense in the SEC, where Alabama has the potential to have the number 1 offense in the SEC. And that's a bit
not
surprising.
Bad for a team who just lost maybe their best quarterback ever.
Yeah, I agree. And that was surprising to me, too. I can see Georgia being the number 1 defense, no doubt. But if Alabama is going to win that prize of having the number 1 offense, we're going to have to really gel, come together quickly. And by October 17th, there's only 3 other games that they can put together some sort of resume that can show them to be that offensive powerhouse before they go up against the potential number 1 defense in the SEC. So I feel like that Alabama could win that game, but with the defensive stoutness that Georgia has, that's going to be really difficult. And so Alabama has to really get their game and act together on offense in order to have a shot against the Bulldogs. That's what I think right now.
So win or loss?
I'm a homer, baby. I'm going to say win.
I'm taking notes here. I gotta know. Homer all the way. Come on.
And especially because we're playing them at home, I think that will give us, even at 20% capacity or whatever the amount of people that will be able to be in the stands.
It's going to be like a high school game.
It really is, and it will probably sound like it too because of it being so echoey in these big, huge stadiums in the SEC. But I will say win for the Georgia game. We're really going to have to get our act together between now and then to prove that our offense can actually score more points and their defense can keep us from scoring. So I'm going to say, moving on to, sadly enough, the 4th Saturday in October, where in our namesake, the 3rd Saturday in October, when your beloved Vols play mine, Crimson Tide, it's actually going to be on the 4th Saturday this year, out of 5 Saturdays in October this year. So you can't squeeze any more Saturdays than that.
Next to last Saturday in October. That should be the name of the rivalry. That should be the name of our podcast, because that's how it usually ends up.
If the 3rd Saturday in October wasn't wordy enough for a podcast title, I would take the next to last Saturday in October. I think, though, that Alabama has the potential to beat Tennessee, especially with a good showing against Georgia the week before. But you're dead on, man. That little grouping of games for us, playing Georgia and then the very next week playing Tennessee, though, that's kind of the toughest stretch that we have. And so there's the potential to slip up there. I will say that Alabama will pull that one out. But again, this is all based on potential. I am hoping that we have the showing that will put us into the running for most all of these games. But I want to be optimistic and to be excited about it, but also know that, again, playing an all SEC roster like you're talking about, this is a gauntlet all the way through the season. So
it's gonna be fun.
I will say on October 31st when we play Mississippi State, I think that that's an easy win. Not an easy win, but I think it's easy to say that Alabama will outlast Mississippi State. Then we have an off week for, it looks like, the 7th week in the schedule. Then we have an off week, but we're coming back with LSU. I actually, amateur sports enthusiast opinion here, I feel like we'll have a harder time against Georgia than we will against LSU because of the defense that Georgia's going to bring to the table and the reloading that LSU has, as well as the revenge factor of Alabama losing to LSU and then not being able to vie for the championship. There's a revenge factor there that I think that Alabama is going to be up for. So I say that we win there. Then the next week at Kentucky, we're going to take care of Auburn. Is always one of those coin toss kinds of things for the Iron Bowl. But by that period of time, if we are 8-0, I'd say we're going to stay that way and go 9-0 because at that point, we've got a lot of national championship thoughts running through our heads, especially if we make it past Georgia, Tennessee, and LSU. So I'm going to say that they take down Auburn, and then the final week, we actually have a kind of a come down week with an easier win against Arkansas to finish the season 10-0, baby.
It's hard for me to argue with this. I agree. Win against Georgia, win against Tennessee. I just don't see I don't see Nick Saban having lost anything in order to lose to a former assistant.
Yeah.
I mean, at Alabama, he's infinity and O against former assistants.
Mm.
You know, against Ole Miss. Ole Miss is still rebuilding after I mean, kind of like Tennessee, a lot of years of just mismanagement. A&M, I think, is going to be interesting just because it's so early. But looking at this schedule, a bye week before LSU really helps. And yeah, you've got a tough couple weeks of Georgia, Tennessee, but then you've got Mississippi State, which I think Alabama will handle convincingly, and then you've got a week off to prepare for LSU, rest some bodies, and then finishing out Kentucky, Auburn, Arkansas. I mean, I think Alabama has a good shot at going 10-0 in an all SEC schedule.
Yeah.
I mean, that lineup, other than Georgia, Tennessee back-to-back weeks, is pretty manageable.
Yeah. But I do see both on the Vols schedule and Alabama's schedule that there are 5 games that make or break the season. And so I think that there are 5 games on both schedules that should be pretty solid wins for both Tennessee and Alabama. But there are 5 games there. And other than the back-to-back Georgia-Tennessee for Alabama, it looks like that we have kind of an off week between the difficulties. And so that latter part of October is going to be difficult. But Missouri, I think, will be easier than Texas A&M. And then after that, we have Ole Miss, which will maybe not be as difficult. And then Georgia, Tennessee is going to be tough. But then Mississippi State, getting back up for LSU, maybe have a breather with Kentucky, get back up for Alabama, and then maybe be able to round out the season in convincing fashion against the Razorbacks. So I think that it's a doable 10-0. We could falter somewhere, and I feel like that if that's going to happen, it will most likely happen against the Bulldogs of Georgia, not the Bulldogs of Mississippi State, but then also the Tigers of either LSU or Auburn are going to be difficult also. So, but that Texas A&M, Georgia, Tennessee, LSU, and Auburn are going to be difficult and not gimme wins by any stretch.
Well, LSU and Auburn are going to be tough because it's a long season and it got longer. Even though we're playing 2 fewer games, the season got longer. And I think the reason that I say I think Alabama can go 10-0 or at worst end up first in the SEC West is because Saban's been there a long time. He's got top 5, top 3 class after top class just stacked. Redshirt seniors, juniors, sophomores, freshmen. They are just loaded. And the way that he's been able to develop players, it doesn't matter who his staff is. The way that he runs his staff to develop his players, I don't know that there's any team better set up for this 10-game SEC schedule than Alabama. I mean, I don't care who you put up against them. I think they are most prepared for this gauntlet.
Yeah, I agree. And knowing especially that LSU has got to reload at a record-breaking pace that Joe Burrow was able to do last year, I feel that Alabama, the place that we probably lack the most, or I have the least amount of confidence, other than our kicking game, which is just, I'm not even going to talk about that, but is at the defensive backs side of the ball. And I think that LSU, they have their weakest at least at this point, on the offensive passing side, because I've just not seen anything to prove if they're going to be dominant or not this year there. So I think that we match up, some of our weaknesses and their weaknesses match up to where I hope that they cancel each other out.
It's time to play some football.
What is it? We're in mid-30s right now. I think it's either 36, 35 days away. The Saturday is just a few days away, so I think that will be 35 days away. So I'm ready, man. I'm so ready.
There's no appetizer. There's no dessert. It is meat and potatoes, week in, week out. It's going to be heavy. It's going to be starchy. There's going to be lots of protein to gnaw on.
I love this, though. I mean, this feels
give me a
like
fork and knife. Let's eat.
Yes, absolutely. Give me all that starch and protein. That's my favorite part anyway.
Oh, man. Yeah. If this season plays out, if Tennessee gets to start at South Carolina, finish at Florida, play every game in between, it's going to be hard going back to any other schedule.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see the economics of it. And I mean truly the money portion of it, because smaller programs depend on the Tennessees and Alabamas and LSUs going and playing them for homecoming, playing them the first game of the season, and making $500,000, $1 million, sometimes more than $1 million. Just show up and we'll give you a check. So I do worry about that, just because I do know the importance of sports in getting an education for some students. But man, this is going to be exciting. So
let's do it, man. Let's get in there. Let's play some ball.
So, I mean, I'm just about to burst if I go on anymore. I mean, all I can say at this point is roll Vols, baby.
Roll Vols, baby.
And until next week, find us on social media at TSIO Pod, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can check out this video recording on YouTube as well. Just search Third Saturday in October.
Yeah.
I've already said
I want to hear from other SEC fans as well, what they think of their schedules. I would love to just in the comments on YouTube or reach out to us in social media if you're listening to the podcast. What are your thoughts about this schedule? Do you think that some of the teams got by with not adding more difficult teams? Do you think that there was some favoritism shown? I want to hear it. Let's argue about it.
Absolutely. I got to say it one more time. Roll Vols.
Roll Vols, baby.